Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure and honor to welcome our chief guest, Professor Najeeb Jung, here today for the IILM Founders Day lecture. A very warm welcome to you, sir. By way of background, Professor Jung is an alumnus of St. Stephen's College. He continued his education at the London School of Economics, where he did his MSc in Social Policy and Planning in Developing Countries. In 1973, he joined the Indian Administrative Service and had a distinguished career in government, handling several key assignments. He had a long stint at the Asian Development Bank in Manila, where he served as a senior energy specialist. Before his current appointment as the Vice Chancellor of Jamia, Professor Jung was at the Oxford Institute for Energy Studies, University of Oxford. He has published several monographs and reports on the energy sector and is a regular contributor to national newspapers on education and social issues. He is presently the chairman of a core committee of Vice Chancellors appointed by the Ministry of Human Resource Development to examine various aspects of higher education, member of Senate of the Indian Institute of Technology, Kanpur, and several other committees at the national level. At Jamia, Professor Jung has ushered in a host of needed changes while maintaining continuity. Open and accessible to the students and faculty alike, he has been able to win over their hearts by being a part of them. These were amply evident last year when he personally acted in a play at Jamia, which earned for him a resounding ovation for his sterling performance. Professor Jung commands deep respect from students, faculty, and the government alike. His expertise has been called for many times by the Ministry of Human Resource Development to chart out the course of higher education in the country. The changes that he has been able to bring in at Jamia have earned rich recognitions for the university. His views and thoughts over the years will continue to imprint on the landscape of higher education in India. It is our pleasure to have you with us today, sir. May I now invite you to please deliver your special lecture on conflict continuum, distance, difference, and inclusion.
Mr. and Mrs. Rai, faculty, the IILM, students, respected guests from outside the IILM and from Delhi. And thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I am deeply honored. And honestly, my initial reaction was to try to get out of this. But on this persuasion, I'm afraid you will be inflicted with something. Two things first. When you hear things about yourself, you know what wrong things and incorrect things are written. You don't believe them yourself, you know the truth. So please do not believe of what has been said here. The other thing is listening to the song that was sung just before we started. It contains substantially what I plan to speak today. The topic I gave is a little convoluted. I will explain it as I go along, but it's something which is impacting us, our civilization, and society around us. And so it is very close to all of us, which is conflict, conundrum, distance, difference, and inclusion. Because conflicts surround us today, nationally and internationally, and they arise from differences in issues of inclusion and exclusion of some or other members of society. And today the struggle for the human being across the world, just not in our country but everywhere else, seems to be for greater economic prosperity. Therefore, governments are expected to deliver just and fair administration, ensure law and order, ensure equal treatment of all citizens irrespective of their caste, religion, even sexual preferences. Government must provide us the basic wherewithal to live a life of decency, and to provide us an opportunity to enhance our quality of life. The normal interpretation of this would mean economic prosperity, adequate opportunities for education, good health, a clean environment, etc. These are all very obvious things, and they all come through the process of governance. So there's government and there is governance. In many of the Scandinavian countries, you would notice, in some European and North American, the North Americas and Australia, you will see governments tend to convert effective governance into a function that provides greater happiness to citizens. So happiness becomes a quotient of life. And for centuries, philosopher kings have endeavored to find the process through which positive and sensitive governance can provide the ideal form of existence for its citizens. In the 2nd century in ancient Rome, Emperor Marcus Aurelius was the epitome of such efforts. He was a king by day and a philosopher at night. And after the famous Battle of Kalinga, which we are all famous with, Emperor Ashoka underwent a similar metamorphosis. This was repeated by Akbar in his experiment with what he called the Deen-e-Ilahi. And much closer to our time, in the form of philosophical guidance provided by Mahatma Gandhi to Jawaharlal Nehru. Although Gandhi did not live to guide Nehru through the spiritual governing process. In the context of what I have said, I am restricting this talk to issues pertaining to conflicts, differences, and inclusion within our own country. There are enough examples if we go out, but let's look at us, because most of you are students. And I believe that the quality of education you are getting in this esteemed institute, if you go through this institute without developing the sensitivity that is required in life, then this institute and indeed education per se would have not served its purpose. Commencing with the framing of the Constitution that represented a break from the past, our own Constitution, the Preamble of the Constitution sets out the aims and aspirations of the people of India. And it's a very fascinating document. I would advise you students, if at any point of time you have, to read this Constitution. It is one of the finest documents ever made by the human mind. And the Preamble says that we, the people of India, have solemnly resolved to constitute India into a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic. So anything that you desire in life, the Constitution would provide you. And to secure for all its citizens justice, social, economic and political, liberty of thought, expression, belief and worship, equality of status and all opportunity, and to promote among them all fraternity, assuring the dignity of the individual and the unity and integrity of the nation. Now, it is not for me to judge the intent of any of the governments that have functioned in independent India. But I do believe that successive governments have tried to provide decent livelihood. And then I ask, why have governments failed to provide basic amenities? And at this stage, I'm not even referring to the psychological state of those who live in sub-minimal conditions. I'm referring to the best of governments that are failing to deliver good governance in India. And that after a period of time, governments shut their eyes to acute conditions of deprivation and poverty. Just recently we hear the Planning Commission saying that 29 rupees a day is adequate for a livelihood. This is a first-class example of a government closing its eyes on what is happening around it. We are sensitive, we are democratic, we are secular, but do we care for our poor? And therefore through this lecture, because again you are students and you are going to enter big businesses and earn money, I want to draw your attention to the issues of neglect and sufferance that people go through, where people are forced to break laws and risk the wrath of government and the police and the army. Now let's look back. Let's look back at negligence that takes place. 2 years ago, almost 2 years to the day, Parliament passed a very historical bill, the Women's Right to Representation Bill. You're all aware of that. It took 14 years for the bill to reach the stage. And I don't know if you remember the drama that was enacted in Parliament that evening. It was an envy of any playwright that would have written such a scene. Snatching and tearing of papers, feigned attempt at attacking the chairman's podium, protesting and lying on the floor of the House, marshals evicting esteemed members of this so-called House of Elders, stage-managed protests, interviews with TV channels. So I was reminded of Nehru's famous speech of a soul long suppressed finding utterance, the soul of the women of India. And think back, as you are here, think of ordinary women who live 5 kilometers away from where you are sitting now, the walled city of Delhi. That's where I grew up, and so I think of those women. She wakes up at 4:30 a.m. to a very magical sound. It's a magical sound of water falling from taps that are dry for 24 hours. So the sound is indeed magical. This is the great Bhojla Pahadi of Emperor Shah Jahan. The taps will turn off in half an hour. Today this imperial city is near unfit for human habitation. I'm talking of the city 5 kilometers away from Parliament and 5 kilometers away from New Delhi. These houses are long past their structural life. The mohallas are unimaginably overpopulated. A house that was home to the family of perhaps 4 or 5 in the 50s now houses 3 times the number. The men are uneducated. They spend their lives as rickshaw pullers, factory laborers or kabadis. Most of them would be either Dalits or Muslims. Physically completely drained, terrible nutrition. It leaves them incapable of any real work as early as in their 40s. The escalating price of a basic diet, which can be in dal, vegetables, etc., is all unaffordable to them. The staple diet is coarse wheat, coarse rice, and mind you, buffalo meat. And they can't afford vegetable oil, so the meat is cooked in the fat of the buffalo itself. This dreadfully unbalanced diet leads to obesity, heart disease, other ills that follow in the train of bad food, too much or too little physical exertion, and the lack of ventilated homes and fresh air. Now consider the impact on the women in here. Ailing, uneducated, sullen men hang around the house. Of the 2 rooms in the average dwelling, the men have the first right to rest. So on a summer afternoon in Delhi, when the temperature drops about 40 degrees Celsius, the only place for women to stretch their legs is atop the roof. These women move directly from childhood to womanhood. There's no adolescence here, no carefree teen years as you enjoy here. There is no nostalgia in life. And married off young, they relive their mother's hardships in new homes. Young girls married in their teens are old women by the time they reach their 30s. Multiple pregnancies. They have no right over their fertility, these women. Unhealthy food, unhelpful men, raised cholesterol levels, creaking joints, hypertension. No one speaks for them. See, this is Delhi. No politician, no civil servant, no social worker, no NGO. Who is not aware of this terrible lot? I don't know how many of you have seen this famous film from Guru Dutt. I forget the name. But I remember the quote of Sahir, which says, "Ke madad chahti hai ye Hawa ki beti."
Yes, sir.
Yes, there you are. Yashoda ki hamjins Radha ki beti. पैगंबर की उम्मत जुलेखा की बेटी, जरा मुल्क के रहबरों को बुलाओ, ये पूछे ये गलियां ये मंजर दिखाओ, जिन्हें नाज है हिंद पर उनको लाओ, जिन्हें नाज है हिंद पर वो कहां. I only wanted to present a scene of Delhi 5 kilometers from you. That is the sensitivity that governments lack. That is the lack of governance that is happening in this so-called fourth developed economy of the world. 2010 was a very difficult year for Kashmir. You will remember the youth that were killed. And if I remember right, about 122 young men and girls were shot by bullets. I wonder if you remember even one name of the boys and girls who were shot. They're all educated people here. Do you remember one name? Is this the lack of sensitivity that educated people in Delhi would show? Sheikh Abdullah, when he was chief minister, had a famous couplet because he used to write of the volatility of Kashmir. And this couplet was कि जिस खाक की ज़मीर में हो आतिश चिनार, जिस खाक के ज़मीर में हो आतिश चिनार, मुमकिन नहीं कि सर्द हो वो खाक आजुमन. It means the dust that has in its conscience the fire of the chinar tree, that dust, celestial dust, will never become cold. And this dust has smoldered intermittently in